Hey, what up squad, it's your boy K-Flow, and in this video I'm going to show you how to replace the U-joints in your front drive shaft. Now let's get this thing started. If you're new to this channel makes in-depth DIY Toyota Tacoma tutorials for the 2nd gen Toyota Tacoma. So make sure you smash that like, subscribe, and hit that bell too while you're at it. Do it now, guys. Now, according to my YouTube analytics, guys, 85% of you who watch these videos are still not subscribed yet. Come on, man, help a brother out already. Now, all the materials that I use in this video will be on my Amazon page. So make sure you check that out at amazon.kflow-crib.com. Now, before you can access the U-joints on the front drive shaft, you do have to remove that drive shaft first. And I do have a full-blown tutorial that shows the details on how to do that in this channel. So make sure you check that out before you move on to any of these steps that I have in this video. And while you're at it, I would also recommend that you guys watch my rear U-joint replacement video, because I do have some other tips and tricks that you can use from that video and apply it to this one. Now let's get to the garage. So there's the front drive shaft now, guys. As you can see, I marked it with a paint pen so that when I put the flanges back onto the shaft itself, it'll be in the proper orientation, and this further prevents any type of vibration that can occur. So you can see I did the same thing on the opposite yoke. So now let's remove these locking rings here on the yokes, and we'll use a needle nose pliers and a small flathead screwdriver. Now make sure you're wearing safety goggles when you do this, because these things do have a tendency of slipping and shooting out. Now let's do the same thing on this opposite side. See, this one's a little tight, guys. I'm gonna use a hammer, and right now I'm gonna be using one of my screwdrivers to kind of drive this ring inwards. There we go. See, that pried off. Due to the mud, it's kind of stuck in there. Here we go, guys. That one took a little bit of work, but it's off. Now we're going to be using this ball joint separator kit. And this you can rent for free at your local auto parts store. This one I got from Advanced Auto Parts. So this time I did use my bench vise to hold that C-clamp on there to make it easier to do this job. I've done it off of the ground. It's definitely doable if you watched my rear drive shaft U-joint replacement video. So the goal here would be to press out the U-joint cap on the other side, take the cap off, turn this whole thing around, and press the opposite cap as well. And that should pretty much free up the U-joint completely, so we can get this yoke right off. Now I'm going to be using this impact gun to drive this down. You have to be very careful because you definitely don't want to over torque the C-clamp. There's the cap, guys. Now we can use some channel locks to pull her out. Looks like we gotta drive it down a little bit further. There it is. Now we can push it down the other way. Now it actually comes off completely, just like that. Now we could do the same thing on the adjacent side here. And that's it, guys. Now we'll just have to repeat it on the opposite side. And that's it, guys. So here is the front drive shaft completely disassembled now, guys. There's the old U-joints. And now we gotta clean up all these surfaces here with some brake cleaner and a wire brush to get all the crud and all the debris out of there. And we can give it a quick visual inspection. So here, I'm going to pretty much insert the same note that I said in the rear drive shaft U-joint replacement.
Use a flathead screwdriver to clean the grooves where the retaining clips are supposed to sit. We can then inspect the yoke for burrs just like what you see here and use a file to flatten them down.
So now, let's get the file and file down those sharp edges. So here's the comparison, guys, between the old one and the new one. This new one actually has the grease fitting on the outside of the U-joint itself. And I like that much better because it allows you to access that much easier than having to dig in between the yoke so that you can access this grease fitting, because that was actually a big pain in the ass. There's the grease fitting right there, and it goes right on this side. So this kit does come with different size snap rings, and here's the one that came off of the truck, so we'll just have to make sure we pick the right size one when we install this new U-joint. So here's the U-joint now, guys. What I'm going to do when I reassemble it is actually have the grease fitting pretty much lined up where the painted line was along the shaft, so that we don't have to keep rotating the drive shaft in order to grease both of the U-joints. So now we can remove one of these bearing caps on the U-joint. Just like that, guys. We got to make sure that the needle bearings inside don't fall down. And here's a few other tips that I'll be sharing with you.
Now we can take the U-joints and remove one of the bearings, as you see here. Inspect inside. Make sure that none of the needles fell inwards like this. If they did, take a screwdriver and just push them back against the wall. Now I'm going to be using this bearing press again to push in the one needle bearing cap into the drive shaft. So we're only partially pressing it in. So here's the U-joint with the cap removed. We'll also remove the other cap. Just like that. Again, make sure you line up the hole with the paint. So I have the hole here, and the paint is on the opposite side here. We'll just carefully install it just like that. Now we could put on the other cap. Being really careful not to disturb the needles in there. Now let's get the snap ring installed in there, guys. We'll just use needle nose pliers. And that's what it's gonna look like once it's fully seated, guys. Now let's push on the other bearing cap so we can get the other snap ring in there. Now we could put one of the bearing caps on the yoke. Again, partial install. Now with this side, we do have to modify the snap ring so that we can still put on the grease fitting. So here's the snap ring, guys. We are going to have to cut this L portion of the snap ring, and I'm going to use an angle grinder to cut that little piece off. And that's what it looks like, guys, after making the modification with the angle grinder, and we'll install it. And we can also install the grease fitting at this point. And I'm using an 8mm wrench to install that grease fitting. So that's what it looks like. And now we'll just have to use the press on the opposite side. And again, throw the snap ring right onto that part of the flange. Just like that, guys. And now we'll make sure this thing moves freely, but it should not be seized when you're doing this.
Now if that U-joint is a little bit tight, I would recommend taking a hammer and just tapping around the top of each needle bearing cap. That way it will loosen up that joint a little bit so it can move more freely.
So that's pretty much it, guys, when it comes to installing the new U-joint. And we'll just have to repeat this whole thing on the opposite end of the drive shaft. It would be good to put a little bit of wheel bearing grease on these bearing surfaces to make it easy to assemble. Also, just a quick note, this is how I have the press set up. So I have my impact wrench right there, and that's what drives the screw down to squeeze on the U-joint, and this whole thing is attached to a bench vise. Too far. So if you end up pressing in the bearing cap too far, you could just push it all the way through and start over. Now it would definitely be good to go around and just double check to make sure that the rings, those snap rings, are seated properly. And now we can also take our grease gun and top off the grease in those U-joints. We can also wipe off all the excess grease that comes out. So that's pretty much it, guys. The only thing we have left to do is reinstall this front drive shaft onto the truck.
Again, I would recommend that you guys watch the front drive shaft removal and reinstallation video, as well as my original U-joint removal and reinstallation video for the rear drive shaft. So that's pretty much it for this video, guys. Thanks for watching. And if you haven't yet, make sure you smash that like, subscribe, and hit that bell too while you're at it. And until next time, peace.